Since we had a little bit of an issue on second and third period on half got done. Second period did, but I wanted to make sure we had it done, so I told everybody to take your notes out. Chapter 26 in the review book, I had to on Friday. I put that down, but I'm not gonna do a quiz tomorrow. If we do it, it'll be on Monday, okay? And in your review packet, the review terms I gave you, which is due the 11th. So on page 9 of the packet, page 9. Okay. Page 9. That's every the first half of the page was about 14 terms. That's everything. Chapter 26. I will sign chapter 27 also. So we're bumping everything back one day. That's second. And so those are the things I'll quiz you on. It's right there. And remember, this is still on the 11th. The best score you can get. The best score you can get on this is a 79% if you just do the highlighted ones and the last page. That, and I mean the best. I mean you'll get a 79 necessarily. And then so to get a B, you're gonna have to do a lot of the first page 6, a lot of the next few pages, and of course the last page. To get an A, you pretty much gotta do all the first six pages. A lot of, show that you've done some to review the main points, and then the last page. Sound good? On Monday, intervention time. I will take that entire time or so long, and go through as much of that last page. So I will help you out with that. It will be very quick, but you'll be shocked how fast I can go. Sound good? If people remind me to do it. I couldn't forget, so I'll just start rolling. But if you can't, I know that's an issue, but I'll try to record it. I'll set it in, I'll try to set myself a record. Sound good? And I'll just go right down the list. I'll just go down, not a lot of explanation. So between 5 and 7% of the AP exam, it's 1980 after, just the way they do the test. And so there's always maybe like 2 multiple choice, 2 groups of multiple choice, so about 6 questions, maybe another little part of the writing, but that's it. So as long as you have that last sheet, those basics, that's never been a problem. It's never been a problem in the past. So that's why the big areas where the essays will be, basically the events leading up to the American Revolution through what we're going to finish in class. That's to the 7th. We're up into the 7th. Sound good? Tomorrow we are going to watch a video in class, the last one, and it'll be kind of the last little change pace where we go really hard the last 5 days, class time. And we're watching a great one. It's on what happened in the 1950s, how we triggered the civil rights movement called The Rage Within. If you're not going to be here on Friday, come see me. There's a worksheet that goes along with it, because of course that's what I do. And sound good? Where do we finish here? We got here, right? CIA. We got the CIA? Yeah. This look good to everybody? Yep. What was the doctrine that would lead to it? That the communists are everywhere, the domino theory, Truman doctrine. Where were the 2 countries, the US for the Turkey and Greece? But which country was actually having a revolution? Yeah, Greece was. And they kind of exaggerated the threat by saying Turkey to make everyone all afraid. And so let's just get going. Oh, gray suits. Everyone go get your gray suit. So out of this will come the national security state. And this is going to be radically different. This has never happened in American history. This is a state, a nation now militaristic, and now operating in the situation like we're in total war. So presidential powers are going to go up. Who does the CIA? Who does the NSA? Who does any of this? All of those start for the president. And part of this is war without a declaration of war. Now, this has happened in the past, but very rarely. The Constitution is very clear. The president cannot go to war. The U.S. cannot go to war without congressional approval, aka a declaration of war. But they looked at the reality of the new world with nuclear weapons. And so they're thinking of a future situation, let's say 1955, and we envision fleets of Soviet bombers flying over the Arctic towards the United States. and they would not be picked up by radar until they got to about here. That means 15 minutes to an hour before Soviet bombs start raining down the United States. Is that enough time to ask for a declaration of war? And the decision was we need to retaliate right away. Now just take that same thing 15 years later. Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, are picked up. Actually, in 1965, they'd pick them up over the Arctic. By the 70s, they would pick them up by satellite. That means less than a half hour. That is why if you ever see the president and he's walking, there'll be usually an Air Force officer following right there with the side of the president, carrying a 70-pound big, weird-looking briefcase. Yeah, they call it the football. And those are all the launch codes. So the president, they said he has to have the authority to launch. Technically, only the president can do that, but it's not exactly 100% the way it works. Like if there's a sneak attack and the president is killed, which might be an issue down the road for a lot of dystopian novels and movies later on. But these are all the presidents, therefore, with the increased power. So they call the imperial presidents from the Cold War. There's Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy. By the way, I chose this because they all look creepy. LBJ, Nixon, Gerald Ford, Carter, Reagan, and the last one of the Cold War, George Herbert Walker Bush. You were born, most of you, when his son was president, right? George W. Bush. So now the United States is involved everywhere. And there's something else. Once you have spies, once you have this covert government, you have now created a shadow government that must operate under a veiled secrecy, which of course makes sense. Spies have to maintain secrecy. How you gather intelligence has to maintain secrecy. But therefore, you have this entire branch of the body that everybody accepts is secret, covert. Today, they would call it the dark state. And how soon do you suppose it would be that the president will use this power to maintain a secret shadow government to hurt their political enemies within the US? How soon? That's what Watergate was. The president of the United States using the excuse of a CIA operation back in the 60s called the Bay of Pigs as cover to break into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to try to undermine the Democrats and steal an election, which actually Nixon went pretty handily, didn't need to do it, but that's basically using the power of the shadow government to get rid of the democracy. He would resign before that happened. And you start hearing people justifying this. You ever heard national security? It's all because of national security. It's national security, we got to keep this secret. Heck, President Clinton would try to hide an extramarital affair he was having with an aide, with an intern in the White House by national security. That's part of the reason he would try to hide it. So this could be used for all sorts of reasons. And not directly part of it, but it applies. Once this realization that the war could be anywhere, the United States started their first ever peace contract. So, never before in its history the U.S. did a draft of peace stuff. This would not be a draft by via lottery, where birthdays would be decided randomly. They would pull out a call for a number of people they need drafted. Then every district, basically every county, their draft board would pick people who would be drafted, anywhere from 18 to 37. So if you had political connections or a little bit of wealth, you could get out of the draft. And this would become an issue in the Vietnam War. My dad would be drafted during this time. He'd be drafted and sent to Germany. So, 1948, the Marshall Plan. Unlike the National Security Act, another part of this was going to be the rebuilding of Western Europe. For the first 3 years after the war, the United States was basically telling Europe, the war is over, you're fine. The realization hit that Europe was in ruins. Even areas that weren't destroyed by the war, their economy was in shambles, Britain was broke. Here's rubble after the Blitz in Berlin. I'm sorry, in London. Here's Berlin. That's 1947. Berlin was absolutely destroyed. It's going to take years, and that will be a perfect breeding ground for communism or fascism. But now we're thinking communism. And Truman sold this to a conservative Congress by saying, nobody wouldn't want to give money to rebuild for humanitarian reasons, but it will keep them from becoming communists. He asked for $48 billion over 3 years, which back then was real money. He got 12, and he was happy. He did the ask for more than what he wanted, a bargaining trick. And if this was one of the most successful anti-Soviet style of communist programs in American history. And not only did money go to Western Europe, money went to the Allied occupation zones of Germany, soon to be called West Germany, and technically it's a separate program, but we tie them together. Money went to Japan. So the United States is going to help rebuild mortal enemies. Unlike World War I, help mortal enemies so they don't do it again. Unprecedented. This really was the definition of liberal foreign policy. And it opened up a market for US goods, because to rebuild Berlin, they had to buy the materials. And where are they going to buy it? Therefore, helping the American economy. It had a multiplier effect. For every $1 billion that was spent in Europe, as you can see by the drum roll, every billion in Europe would lead to $2 billion of economic activity in the US. It was a boom. And George Marshall was Secretary of State. He was a 5-star general during the war. So that's Marshall right there. He proposed it in a speech. It's actually called the European Recovery. So here's a girl in Berlin holding balloons up. They really tried to market it, but you can imagine in Germany, there's a lot of resentment against occupying armies. And the numbers didn't come through on the graph, but just by the size, you can see where most of the money went. And a lot here. And they don't have it here, but yes, money went to Luxembourg. And it's not part of it, but money would go to Japan. And you'll notice a little bit of economic aid to Turkey and Greece. But that's going to lead, though, this will start the process of what's called the Berlin blockade. So if the United States is going to economically rebuild the occupation zones of Germany, they need a financial system. They need money. So they decided, with the Marshall Plan, just a decision made by France, the UK, and the United States to make a common currency called the Deutschmark. So they can have a central bank, and they can organize and not use occupation script, it's called. They offered Marshall Plan aid to the Soviet Union, but told Stalin, you must allow for democracies, which of course he was not going to do. So Stalin already sees himself as economically isolated. And even though the Red Army is incredibly powerful, the US has the dominant economic power in the world. And it would hold that till well into the 1980s. That's now done. But Stalin saw as them being isolated. And the United States not understanding the hell they went through. 25 billion Soviets were killed in this war. It was a wasteland. There's an entire lost generation in the Soviet Union. And so he said, I can't allow this. And it violates the four-power agreement from Potsdam. So he looks at it and says, we're not going to allow this. Because there's one more thing. If you create a common currency, that everyone uses the same dollar, a national bank, what if you just created a country? Soon that country will be called West Germany. They created a country. And Stalin's other big fear was that the Western Allies would rearm Germany and send them back to attack the Soviet Union again. Now, this makes absolutely no sense. But in his paranoia, he believed him. So here they come. But Berlin, French, British, American occupation zones. And their response was for feeding the 1.5 million people there. So there are 3 routes. This goes back to Yalta, just designated for resupply of the zones. A land, road and rail, and air route to each of the 3 zones. So what Stalin did is this. You know the land routes? They were so destroyed in the war, they need repairing, AKA a blockade of the land routes in the border. So only the air routes are open. Now, the United States did not see it the way that Stalin did. They did not understand that Stalin is actually desperate and worried about his economic situation and paranoid about the future, especially because Germany has attacked twice before. So the US sees it as he's surrounding Berlin to take it as part of his plan to take the rest of Western Europe. They did not understand each other. What do we call that? The ability to understand what other people are thinking. You don't have to agree with them, but to understand where they're coming from. So, empathy. They didn't have empathy. If you don't have empathy, you drop frisbees. And if you don't have empathy, you don't know what you're anybody. Somebody you have a disagreement with, or a country you might be going to war with. You don't understand where they're coming from. You don't have to agree with them, but empathy is really important. Neither side understood. They exaggerated the threat from each other. It's amazing that we made it. I'm not going to lie. So, Stalin gave the West a choice. Keep Western Berlin, keep your occupation zones in Berlin. It wasn't called West Berlin yet. Or what's going to become West Germany. And here's a cartoon of Stalin blocking this, but the air routes are open. And one more thing. Look at Berlin. Look at the rubble. These are people, Berliners. This is right near Tempelhof Airfield. That's an American C-47 company. And they began an airlift. Now, Truman knew the airlift, all he had to do is resupply for a while and hopefully avoid war. And it worked. 10 months. At first, it was kind of a disaster, but soon there was a carpet of planes flying into the 3 airports in each, one in each occupation zone. So Tempelhof was in the American. Now Tempelhof, Berlin has a big, modern, massive airport. Tempelhof is, you have the old airport, but it's like a big park. And it's like, if you go to Berlin, you'll see thousands of people walking their dogs on Tempelhof Airport. This is right outside Tempelhof. Look at the rubble where the children are standing. So a few American pilots begin to make little parachutes, and they take little bits of chocolate, little bits of candy. You can imagine the Berliners were just, they're starving. They're barely making it. And they started dropping it to the kids. And that became a thing that the British and American pilots began to do. So that's what these kids are, yay, now throw your chocolate. And it was more successful than anyone could have thought. The hardest part was carrying coal. To heat Berlin has pretty cold winters. That was their source of heat. And coal takes up a lot of space. But somehow they got, I like the air cartoon, they got around, it worked. One more thing, 1948 is an election year. It made Truman look tough on communism without blowing the world up. He's fighting back. He's not backing down, but it's not World War III. Stalin realized he had failed. It did not work. It did not work. And airlifts would eventually, and that was the last thing brought in. Oh, have you seen a European raven? Yeah, they'll take children away. This won't be Legos. But I just thought it was a great picture. Stalin back down. But the problem is now the Cold War, it's done. It's there. The Cold War, it's on. It can't go back. Can't go back to the United Nations fighting Germany. It's over. By the way, these are two companies. These are airlifting supplies and Boeing planes. Boeing's like, yeah, we like this airlift thing. The routes are now open. And so all the way up until 1989, those three routes, rail, one Autobahn route and one air route, kind of went through East Germany. It was kind of surreal after the 1960s, and they built the wall. And the United States responded with its first ever military alliance. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, just as long as you know NATO, it's a good example. Let's say if we get a question on the Cold War, NATO is a great example. And it's a military alliance, and the US, Canada, and then those states in blue. And of course, you see Greece and Turkey eventually will both join. Still all part of NATO. NATO still exists. And you might see two other countries. 1955, West Germany began to rearm. And soon they would have 1 million man army. And that's our former enemy, fascist Spain, too, because they're anti-communist. And so the Soviets would respond 6 years later with what's called the Warsaw Pact. So when I was a kid, it was NATO versus Warsaw Pact. The US would come up with other military alliances, but the US was never militarily committed. Remember George Washington's farewell address, no foreign commitments. They kind of stuck to that in peacetime, no more. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, most of these states would join NATO, and it's still the US is still part of NATO today. President Trump is openly hostile to NATO and threatening to end the alliance. So we'll see what happens there. He is much more, without a doubt, he is much more favorable to, let's say, Russia. So that's NATO. We will come back to this. We'll come back. 1944, also post-war world. Bretton Woods was going to be an agreement to set up some kind of financial system in the post-war world. Bretton Woods is in upstate New York. It's a big resort. I guess it's near the Finger Lakes. Beautiful area of New York, just in the Adirondack Mountains. And it would set up a stable financial system where everybody outside the Soviet Union, their dollar, their money will be based upon the dollar. Because the United States had such a dominant economic position. The US economy in 1946 was bigger than all the rest of the world combined. Of course, the problem with that is every year the relative strength of the United States is so shrunk. Every year since then, its countries recover and grow. And now it's accelerating really quickly. And then the US would be loosely based upon gold. It worked until the US dominance was about 60, you can see it shaking apart. In 1971, the US would go off the gold standard completely, and that would end. But not totally. We're still, at least up until 2025, the US was still operating under, the world still had the Bretton Woods system, but that is now collapsing at this moment. But the West had, after this, the basic that everyone adopted Keynesian economics. In Europe, they called it social democracy. So elements of capitalism regulated with certain kind of socialist principles like guaranteed healthcare and guaranteed college tuition, things that did not happen here, but the US had elements of it. In the 1970s, when things begin to break down, that's when we see the growth of conservatism, especially in the US and Britain. And a new word for conservative economics, especially by people who did not, for political reasons, neoliberalism. Neoliberalism was conservative economics. Liberal in maybe social issues. So you start seeing Democrats, conservative Democrats call themselves neoliberals. In your lifetime, well, I guess not in your lifetime. Oh, in your lifetime, Obama and Biden. And President Clinton. The term wasn't used yet, but it would apply for President Carter too. Not Kennedy or Johnson. They were right. So, but there's going to be a post-war depression, a worldwide depression. and not as bad as World War I. The US was much better prepared, at least not as bad in the US. And the last bit of the New Deal under Roosevelt will be passed right at the end of 1944. Remember, he wanted college education for everybody. That was part of this education plan that didn't pass the third New Deal. This would partially do it. Over conservative, Republican, and Democratic opposition, because it goes against trickle-down economics, the GI Bill passed. And this would provide for veterans of any armed forces, and we're talking now 15 million men and women after World War II, college. Tuition will be paid for, and a little bit extra will be for to live on while you go to college. And also home loan aid for veterans. And this will be huge in the post-war world. Imagine 15 million Americans now being able to go to college and never had that ability. So you're going to have a well-educated, trained, and motivated workforce. These are veterans of the war to help the United States in the post-war world. And access to homes they might never have had, even though there were some issues about race. Big deal. There'll be a couple times, there'll be chances of cut. It was expanded 16 years ago. But if anybody, college is really expensive. It's going to get significantly more expensive. I'm sorry. There's just no way it won't in the next few years. But tough decision. But the GI Bill pays for it. They got some hoops to jump through because that's life. But if you're thinking college, it's pretty unreal. I had a lot of friends who did it, and I had a lot of former students who did it. And it's also so the home loaning is still there too. It's a big deal. It's a benefit. My dad, who was drafted, sorry, went to college. Gee, I bet. I thought about it, but I could not join. They did not want me. Can you believe that? Their loss. Their loss. Don't tear all the ligaments in your knee when you're 15. I'm just throwing that out there. Don't do that. I know it sounds romantic. And you're all above 15, but don't do it today. Then you try to make up for lost time. Just don't do it. So they did physical. So moving on. That's been moving my knee and saying, "Oh, you have no ligaments."
Wait, still?
Well, I've had 5 surgeries, but
Or they was looser? It's like.
not that bad. But it's bad. I know when a storm is coming. When a storm's coming, my knee hurts. The Republicans would sweep in 1946. They would sweep the midterm. For the first time, Republicans controlled both houses of Congress for one term. It only happened one term, but 46. And they would pass one of the most important bills in American history. It's called Taft-Hartley, 1947. And this was an anti-labor union bill. In fact, it got rid of the most effective weapon that unions had, sit-down strikes. But there are other things. It was to weaken unions. So conservative Democrats, conservative Republicans and conservative Democrats joined together to override Truman's veto. Needed 2/3 of the vote. And it's still the law today. And this would begin to erode unions, and you would see an accelerated decline in unions beginning with a very anti-union president in the 1980s named Ronald Reagan. And so union membership is going to be very low. The United States is pretty hostile to labor unions. You might remember the law this overturned. This is a good one to remember. If you forgot, jot it down next to it. Remember the Wagner Act. This would overturn the Wagner Act. So conservatives, this is the beginning of a conservative effort to get rid of the New Deal. Their next target is Social Security. But there'll be a presidential election. The election of 1948, the first election of the Cold War. Truman did not want to run again, but the Democrats felt they had no choice, even though he was very unpopular. He was blamed for the bad economic time. He was blamed for what appeared like the end of the peace. And then Truman's the type of guy, you don't want me? I'm running. So he called his proposal the Fair Deal. Finish the New Deal. This is the last of the deals. We had the Square Deal, but then the biggie, the New Deal. And it would be three parts. It would basically do what the third New Deal wanted: education. So give the GI Bill, in essence, this is what he promoted it as. Make the GI Bill available to everybody, not just veterans. Men and women available. So public schools would be tuition free, and the plan was aid then for private school, but that was not clear. The big thing was for public schools, but also huge amounts of aid that federal aid to K through 12 that had never happened before. Next, a national healthcare insurance system run through Social Security that would go to everybody who would pay a payroll tax into it, matched by their employer. A little like, the closest example I could give would be like Canada, or I'm thinking of countries right now, Australia, Germany, Japan. Those are the kind of system they have. And then civil rights. And Truman already did something remarkable. He would be the president to desegregate the armed forces. You can see the ad right, the article right there. By executive order, there can be no more segregation in the United States Army. And the US Army will become one of the most integrated organizations, entities in all the United States. And originally it was just for men, but then no place would be more open for the promotion of women down the road too. It's actually remarkable. And this has come under attack recently, but it's a big deal, big deal. Well, he proposed this at the convention in 1948. And here's the thing. We got civil rights. What is the law that segregated the South? What do we call those? Jim Crow. So you're going to allow blacks and whites in the same hospital, in the same schools. So it's more, all three are related to civil rights, and Southern Democrats left. Just like 1860 when Southern Democrats left. And they called themselves the same thing. In 1860, they called themselves the states' rights because they were pro-slavery. They dusted off that name and the Confederate battle flag and called themselves, oh, there they are leaving. They're walking up, and Mississippi had just changed their flag to put the Confederate battle flag on there to show that they are pro-Jim Crow. They called themselves, they split over civil rights, and they called themselves the States' Rights Party. And states' rights became code for segregation, code for pro-Jim Crow. And what became their symbol? Just like it was a symbol for the lost cause, the Confederate battle flag, as you can see right here. And just like the Democrats who got elected right after the Civil War, they called themselves Dixiecrats, and they nominated the segregationist governor of South Carolina, Strom Thurmond. And Thurmond would become the symbol of anti-civil rights, anti-equal rights, states' rights. Strom Thurmond. That's 1948. He would be senator into the 20th century. He would finally die as a senator when he was 101 years old. Strom Thurmond. Now, I'm going to give you a quote of Thurmond. Just read the quote. He does not hide what he felt. And this is economic. If you have this class of this group of underclass in the South, for example, it brings everybody's wages down. Negro was used a lot. They would go out of fashion. African Americans would fight very hard to go from Negro to black in the 1960s. But you see, that's kind of saying Negro, but in a way, kind of saying something else. Catch that? So, Strom Thurmond. And there they are at their rally, very disorganized. No picture of Robert E. Lee. No hiding what they wanted. You can imagine what the Republicans were thinking. The Democrats are split into two, just like 1860. All we have to do is put up somebody who won't, basically won't stop breathing. They're sentient. They're alive and not screw up. And they can win. That's what they thought, especially when the Democrats split one more time. Oh, I should add one more thing about Strom Thurmond. So he would become the first Democrat to leave the Democratic Party and become a Republican when the Republicans came out against civil rights. He'd be the first one to do it in 1963. So, progressives, those who thought Truman wasn't going far enough with the New Deal, they ran the very popular former Vice President Henry Wallace. And now the Democrats are split three ways: Truman, Wallace, and Thurmond. Just like the States' Rights Party and John C. Bell back in 1860. The Republicans are in perfect condition. I should add, Wallace was interesting. He thought the Truman Doctrine was going too far and might lead to war. He was not wrong. It did. But he also thought Stalin wasn't near as bad as people said. He was. So he was not 100% right. The Republicans nominated Governor Thomas Dewey of New York. Dewey ran against Roosevelt and lost in 44. And he was a liberal Republican who accepted parts of the New Deal. Conservative Republicans are mad, and that is going to be a refrain of the Republican Party for the next 16 years. And so, Dewey, there's Dewey. The photographer for Life magazine there famously asked Dewey, "Please smile," and he said he was. He was known to be dour, serious, never smiling. It worked really well for him when he was former district attorney in New York City, the attorney general of New York. He's the guy who went after organized crime in the mob. Most famously put Lucky Luciano in prison, one of the most famous mobsters. And so that's what he wrote, the thing. And everyone, they also said he looked like the little man on the wedding cake, which I think is pretty funny. They started doing political polls, and everybody thought Dewey would kill him. It would be a sweep. No contest. Dewey will win. And there they're talking about the polls, and Dewey's just saying, "Why don't we just drop out now?" Everybody thought Truman would lose. Everybody except one person. Truman understood how popular the New Deal was and how the Republican vote was not so much pro-Republican, it was just tired of Democrats and tired of war. And so he aggressively campaigned in the last of the pre-television campaigns. In fact, both conventions were on TV, the first time they were ever on TV. He went around the train, he called this train the Ferdinand Magellan, went through Montana, and would give these impromptu speeches where he would just rail against the Republicans, who are malefactors of wealth, meaning those who want to just bring back the wealthy that brought the Great Depression. They're going to get rid of your Social Security. They do nothing. And railed against them. He did not give a good speech, but he really good at beating his fist and getting them all fired up. And there'd always be somebody in the crowd. Somebody, these quick little impromptu speeches would scream out, "Give him hell, Harry." And he would say, "If you send me back, I will." And everybody would cheer. Most people thought it was futile. Not only did he win what is considered one of the greatest upsets in political history, the Democrats swept. That's blue is for Truman. And you also notice, first off, a lot of states now vote Republican all the time, voted Democratic, vice versa. But you will see this. Notice, those states voted for Thurmond. And it showed how civil rights will become one of the issues that will split apart the Democratic Party. And you'll see the split begin in 1964, but especially 68. So, he would win. Now, Dewey just assumed that he would win. He didn't really have to campaign. And he was told by a lot of people, hit Truman by saying he's soft on communism. Hit him. He refused. But then with Truman winning, especially this picture right here, infuriated Republicans. The Tribune put this out. They wanted to be the first one to have. So you can imagine Truman like, yeah. And now they said the gloves are off. We are going to come after the Democrats with red bait by saying that they are soft on communism. Would it work? Better than anyone thought. There's going to be two shocks in 1949 that will shake the United States to its very core. And because of these two shocks, conservative Southern Democrats and Republicans ended the fair deal. None of that happened. Health insurance got close, but Southern Democrats refused to, under the argument that you're going to have white patients with black patients. The big thing they said is there'll be blood mixing of black blood and white blood. I know, but that's what they said. By the way, I love the Bear Grylls. The two shots, I can't even begin to tell you what a big deal. Right after the election, the first one, the United States codenamed Joe 1. There's Joe 1. That's a model of Joe 1. What was Joe 1? The Soviets exploded their atomic bomb, and we thought they were still a decade away. And all of a sudden now, the US monopoly of the atomic bomb ended, and now the United States has to worry about communist attack. That's where you start telling kids to duck and cover under their desk in the case of atomic war. Yes, I did do duck and cover first through third grade. And as we all know, 500 kiloton bomb, you have it in your desk, you're fine. Don't worry. It was actually really scary. Maybe I'll tell you the really scary stuff. And then survival of nuclear attack. Oh, by the way, the US picked it up because the United States had balloons that looked like weather balloons, but they were specially made to go up about 80 or 90,000 feet in the atmosphere because we wanted to see what our atomic tests were doing. And it picked up an unusual amount of radiation in the atmosphere fallout. And they realized the Soviets must have exploded a bomb. Hey, by the way, one of those balloons would crash near this little town called Roswell. And the next thing you know, aliens are coming in Roswell. Have you ever heard that story? That's what it was. So, but what was the biggie? There were spies that fed the information. Most famously, a Bulgarian physicist who fled fascism to Britain. Then Britain farmed him out to the US program. And he was at that moment in 1949 working on the British atomic bomb that they would soon explode, named Klaus Fuchs. Please be careful spelling his name. Klaus Fuchs. And he was a devoted communist. And he sincerely believed that the United States is vulnerable to fascism. And the only way to stop fascism is for Stalin to get the bomb. So he's the worst type of spy. He's a true believer. He's not doing it for money. He can't be turned. He believes it. And so he fed the secret plans in a dressing room in a clothing store in Santa Fe to the Soviet Union, Soviet spies, and those were the plans on the way. How did the US know it? Knew it. The US had broken the Soviet wartime code. They broke it in 1949. And they're going through all this Soviet coded, all these messages. The Soviets don't know they broke it. So they're looking at all this stuff. And they found Klaus Fuchs things over and over again in the plans for bombing. That's how the US found out. They told the British, who were really embarrassed. The British arrested him, and he admitted right away, so the US didn't have to tell him about our spy break or code breaking. He admitted it. They had a trial that lasted like that fast. And they put him in jail for espionage for the next 20 years. The British did. But now they're spies. He looks just like anybody else. Just like some guy. So who else could be spies? That means there must be other spies. Look around. Look around. Remember, communism is an ideological threat. And that means there are spies. And so all of a sudden, this massive witch hunt went out looking for spies. And there were some spies. Most famously, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Ethel Rosenberg right here was committing espionage. His wife's crime was she probably knew but did not tell. But then in the fever pitch after this happened, they are going to be executed for espionage in the electric chair, both of them. This has never happened before or since in American history, that somebody spied was executed in peacetime. But that should give you an idea how it just, a craze overtook the country. Here they are being executed. And all started because of this. Now let me get the other one. Got just enough time. Oh, so everyone started looking out for an enemy within. And don't forget, the spies could be anywhere. Obviously, spy, you're wearing red, right? Too gray, you're trying to hide your spydom. And so on. Oh, what did you call somebody who is sympathetic to the reds, but not fully red? A pinko, yeah? So, number 2, Red China. the most populous country in the world at this time. What's the most populous country in the world today? India. They were having a civil war, and it raged all through World War II. And when World War II ended and the Japanese left, the war continued. There were two sides. The nationalists, who the United States supported, even though we thought their leader was corrupt and authoritarian, named Chiang Kai-shek. And that's a more anglified version of his name. When I was a kid, it was Mao Zedong, but I use the more proper Mao Zedong. Right there, the head of the communists. Now, I should add, Stalin did not like Mao Zedong. They were rivals. But still, they're having this civil war. The US spent millions of dollars helping Chiang Kai-shek. And last thing, in 1949, the communists did a small offensive. They were outnumbered 10-1 in total numbers of soldiers, using mostly guerrilla tactics, and the nationalists just collapsed. I mean, just collapsed, fell apart. It happened in 3 months. Just all of a sudden, gone. Their army fled. By the way, where did they flee to? Where did Chiang Kai-shek flee to? Taiwan, which it was still called Formosa then, and that became Good China. That was a Japanese colony. I'm not kidding. Good China. And they got Japan's vote in the Security Council until that's Japan's vote. They got China's vote in the Security Council until 1979. And bad China. And that's where we'll finish after the video tomorrow. Sound good? So tomorrow watching the video, I should have the test graded. I have a good hunk of yours and 6th period done. And I got a good hunk of, and I'm hitting second as well. So hopefully I can get oh, what am I doing Monday? I'll go over everything on the last page in intervention time, everything. Everything. You come in, I'll give you all of it. And you can count on me, over half of it will be correct. Oh, if anybody has the atomic bomb reading I gave you to help with the DBQ, either today or tomorrow, just drop it off, give it to me so I can hand it back to the okay? See ya! Brooke, you just, I don't think I totally gave you everything on this.
Okay.
So, we just went over a lot. Okay.
I just have like a bit more.
Oh, okay. On my pieces, Trinity on.
I'm gonna be on tomorrow. Yeah, I'm in Atlanta for that.
Yeah, I knew. So let me give you the worksheet for the video. I'm gonna sign
Like
the
the actual.
27, 28 is the review.
Okay.
And then, one more thing. If enough people want it, then Sunday,
That's probably better.
I think that's the next one. I would do a release.
Okay. We don't want that.
But even, let me.
I wonder if it'll be like, I'm sorry. So like,
What time is it?
I don't know exactly how I know.
Okay, we'll see.
Okay.
So check on Teams. I'll put it up there. Sound good? Coming up?
I think.
Did it load?